The blade that pierced his body came from his gilder. The blade that pierced his heart. The blade that pierced his body came from your glider.
No, his glider.
The blade that pierced his body came from his trailer.
Spider-Man 3 is complicated. Complicated can be good. I like a movie that makes me think, makes me dig beneath the surface. I'm especially impressed by superhero movies that can do this. That can be more than just characters in colorful costumes and a cookie-cutter plot beating up bad guys and saving the day. Spider-Man 2 was complicated in a good way. On the surface, it's about a mad scientist who will stop at nothing to finish his life's work, and Spider-Man has to stop him. Dig a little deeper, and it's a story about redemption. And not just for Doc Ock, but for all the major characters. Who changes and grows, and who refuses to change. So how does Spider-Man 3 compare? Is it really just the convoluted mess it's often accused of being? Or despite its problems, is it too trying to be more than a story about a sand creature robbing banks, a goblin out for revenge, a guy with an alien symbiote out for revenge, and Spider-Man having to stop all these people? Yes, it's absolutely trying to do more than that. I can't accuse Spider-Man 3 of not trying to be more than the sum of its parts. What I can and will accuse it of is trying too hard. Making the third installment in a trilogy is hard. If they're following a successful movie, they have the daunting task of figuring out what made the last one work, continuing in that direction, but not making the exact same movie. What do most last movies and trilogies have in common? The ones that don't work, I mean. Let's look just at the superhero movies. Superman 3, Turtles 3, X-Men The Last Stand, Blade Trinity, and even Batman Forever, though I like that movie more than some. Every one of them has a glaring tone shift from the last installment. Sometimes they don't even feel like they're in the same universe. Often, I think that's the filmmakers trying to avoid sequelitis, making a carbon copy of the previous film. Like how Home Alone and Home Alone 2 both hit exactly the same story points and the same gags at nearly the same times, and the only difference really is location. There are other reasons this happens too, of course, new director, new cast members, etc. But what's ironic about Spider-Man 3 is that it doesn't have that huge tone shift. I can't say that it feels vastly different from the other two movies. That's in large part because Sam Raimi directed all three, and because the cast hasn't changed besides new characters. But my point is, this one has a totally new problem. Spider-Man 2 was too good, and Raimi didn't know how to do it again. But he tries, oh boy does he try. He tries to explore a central theme, he tries to service the characters, and this is where he really goes wrong. He tries to make everyone happy. He wanted Sandman because he thought it would look cool and dynamic. The fans in the studio and Avi Arad wanted Venom, which he agreed to do even though he didn't initially like the character. And he had to wrap up Harry's arc, so he had to become a goblin of some kind after what was set up at the end of 2. There was talk about making it 2 movies because there were so many subplots, and I think that's where the big mistake was made, because a movie with this much stuff going on can't be Spider-Man 2. Not everything must wrap up in a nice bow or follow a preordained story formula where you plug in plot points, character motivations, and conflicts and solve for X, Y, and Z. This isn't a math problem. But because the last movie worked, this movie is trying to use the same formula, even though it has a drastically different set of variables. It's like trying to play checkers with chess pieces. The game just isn't that complicated. So let's look at some of the elements that are borrowed from the last movie and explore what's really going on here. Number 1, back to the origin. Again. Spider-Man 2 used the origin as a part of Peter that he needs to let go of in order to get over his insecurities and get on with his life. A weight is lifted when he finally has the courage to tell his Aunt May about what really happened the night Uncle Ben died. He tries to stop being Spider-Man, but his conscience won't let him stand back and do nothing when people are in danger. He gains some confidence, and he's set up to be a more mature character for this movie. But it makes the fatal flaw of taking us back to the origin, and worse, it adds to it, by making Flint Marko the real killer of Uncle Ben. This feels very much like a tacked-on idea, an afterthought. All it really does is keep Peter in this perpetual funk. He can't move on, and now he's thinking about revenge. It's hard for an audience to really appreciate what Peter's going through when we're questioning the filmmakers for making this choice. When Peter asks Captain Stacy why they never told him for 2 years about Marko when they had eyewitness accounts, he gets no answer. This doesn't make sense. Raimi said he wanted Peter to learn that he isn't a sinless vigilante, and the black suit is supposed to explore his dark side. I like the fact that it addresses something I took issue with in the first movie. Peter looks like a murderer when the burglar, who at the time really was the person who killed Uncle Ben, ambiguously fell out a window, and it's hard to tell whether or not Peter pushed him, but he looks very satisfied about it. Here, that's used to show that he has a dark side, that he's afraid of what he might be capable of if pushed too far over the edge. When Mary Jane brings this up after he tells her he's going after the Sandman, he defends himself and says the burglar fell, but he doesn't sound entirely convinced. This is certainly an interesting idea to explore, and the black suit is a great way to deal with it, since it diminishes his inhibitions. All of that is fine with me. But couldn't that example be raised without Flint Marko and convoluting what really happened to Uncle Ben? Marko was a contrivance, just someone for Peter to want to kill. Later on, Peter also wants to kill Harry for turning Mary Jane against him, which makes this even more unnecessary. Less is more in this case. Have something happen in the here and now to anger Peter enough that he wants to kill someone, and let him explore his limits in the context of this story, not by altering story already set up. Bookending a trilogy is fulfilling when it works, but not if it means regressing a character progression. Number 2, the sympathetic antagonist. I get the distinct feeling that Sandman is a direct result of how much praise Doc Ock got for being a relatable villain. And fair enough. Everyone appreciates bad guys with dimension. But Sandman is a villain with a sob story rather than a tragic character we're invested in. Sandman has a common problem, and he makes a bad choice. He has a sick daughter he can't afford to take care of, so he makes a bad call and steals money. And he accidentally murders Uncle Ben in the process. His motivation is desperation. Not altogether an unsympathetic motivation, to be sure, but he says things like, "I'm not a bad person, I've just had bad luck." He never asks for help. He always resorts to crime. Why? We aren't given enough information. It feels like the movie is begging us to appreciate this guy's circumstances. We get tons of close-ups on the locket with a picture of his daughter. There's this beautiful, tender theme in the score that plays as he's learning to solidify himself once he's turned into sand, which, despite not liking the character, it's a great, sad scene. And I can't help but wonder if this is offending anyone. Isn't there someone who's seen this movie who has a sick child at home and is working 4 jobs to provide for their family? Does that person feel bad for Sandman, or is that person telling Flint to go out and get a job? Number 3, Peter and Mary Jane's relationship. In the last movie, Peter and Mary Jane couldn't be together because he's Spider-Man and he didn't want his enemies to know about her. Now she knows, and they're committed to being together. He even decided to propose. But they have petty conflicts that stem from the same problem they've had this whole series. And that's not out of character, but I want to see them get over themselves a little. It's difficult for me to care when the solution is so obvious. Better communication. In the last movie, secrets were kept for a reason, but here, it's easy drama. Ultimately, their relationship is ruined because they don't tell each other things. Mary Jane, by the way, is entirely selfish and is filled with self-doubt, which she blames Peter for. She's not going to be happy unless she's as famous on Broadway as Spider-Man. Not as famous as Spider-Man on Broadway, as famous as Spider-Man as Spider-Man. Oh, never mind. She's constantly jealous of Peter's success. Why am I supposed to like her again? And why does Peter want to marry her again? The city doesn't hate Spider-Man now, and he's not being chased by the police, and she's jealous? Wow. She treats him like he's being insensitive, but she doesn't give him all the facts. She's been let go of from her part in the play, and doesn't tell him. Why not? She's going to be mad at him unless he figures this out on his own? That's unfair. Oh, and also petty. But Peter's not off the hook here either. He could have saved himself a world of hurt by telling Mary Jane about his dilemma with Harry. She knows he's Spider-Man. Why doesn't he tell her that Harry blames him for his father's death? And because she doesn't know this, she uses him as a rebound when things with Peter aren't going very well. Even though he has amnesia, I doubt she'd have done this if she knew the history between Harry and Peter. This relationship is unhealthy, and it's never really worked from the beginning. It's nothing like Peter and MJ's relationship in the comics, which did work, and it's not rocket science why it's broken. Talk things out, make compromises, learn to both give and take, and if you're too stupid to figure all that out on your own, go to a counselor. I don't mean to just rake Spider-Man 3 over the coals. As I said earlier, it's really trying, but it sinks under its own weight. Thematically, this movie is about forgiveness. Each character has either done something he or she needs forgiveness for, or needs to forgive someone else. This is a logical progression from the last movie, but it doesn't always work. I'll look at some of the characters in these terms, and I'll save Peter for last because his is most problematic. Number 1, Sandman. He accidentally killed Uncle Ben. In the end, even though he helped kidnap Peter's girlfriend and spent 20 minutes trying to kill him, when he finds out Spider-Man is Peter, he feels guilty and asks for forgiveness. Peter grants him that forgiveness, and he's allowed to go on his way. Note that he's the only one of the three villains allowed to live. Number 2, Harry Osborn. Until the last half hour, he refuses to forgive Peter for killing his father, despite Peter's constant attempts to explain what really happened and that it wasn't his fault, held over from the last film. Harry, seeking vengeance, forces Mary Jane to break Peter's heart, saying if she doesn't, he'll kill Peter. Side note, she knows Peter's Spider-Man. Why isn't she smarter than this? The idea of Mary Jane doing this for Peter's safety is ludicrous to me. He fights supervillains on a regular basis. She doesn't think he can handle Harry? Why doesn't she just tell Peter on the bridge what Harry's doing and let them duke it out? But anyway, at the point where the script decides Harry should finally listen to reason, his butler explains that Norman was killed with his own glider, and now he decides to change his ways. I can buy Harry not listening to reason and blindly going after Peter to avenge his father, for all the reasons I stated in my Spider-Man 2 review. Once he starts talking to his dead father in the mirror, all bets are off. Which is, in fact, what snaps him out of his amnesia. It seems like he's developed a similar psychosis to his father, and he's still trying to live up to his dad, even though Norman never really loved him and he's dead. That's wonderfully sad and twisted. I love how the only positive thing he can say about his father here is how he helped him through high school. All of that is thrown out, though, when, like a light switch, he's suddenly redeemed. He forgives Peter, Peter forgives him, and now he's a superhero, fighting Sandman and Venom alongside Peter, calling him buddy and pal and acting like his sidekick. It's really a cheap way to end a 3-movie-long character arc. And then, the final insult. He's killed in a tragic sacrifice. Now this one came out of left field for me. It doesn't work like Doc Ock's death. What are we supposed to take away from this? That it was already too late for him and he had to die? Sure, what he did to Peter and Mary Jane earlier was horrible, but it's not any worse than what Peter did wearing the black costume, when he practically blew Harry's face off. Doc Ock had to die because he made a bed and he had to sleep in it. It was his fault the city was in danger, and the only way to save it was to take responsibility for his actions and sacrifice himself. Not here. Harry made the right choice before it was too late, albeit in a totally contrived and unconvincing way. So what is the film really saying about forgiveness? That it doesn't matter? Or that as long as you had a good reason, you deserve it, but not if you're a jerk to your friends too long? Why does Sandman get to live and Harry has to die? Or perhaps I'm reading too much into this, and what happens to each character at the end is simply coincidental. The last movie certainly made a statement about redemption, and the fate of its characters didn't seem to be random. Number 3, Eddie Brock. He basically plays the same role Harry did in the last movie. He's the extreme antithesis to Peter. He refuses to forgive Peter for humiliating him, and he doesn't think he's done anything wrong by faking his picture of Spider-Man robbing a bank. So he does the most over-the-top thing ever. He goes to a church, a place where people go to ask for forgiveness, and instead of doing that, he asks God to kill Peter Parker. He's living in his own world and doesn't seem capable of seeing things how they really are. Gwen was never his girlfriend. They went on one date, but he blames Peter for stealing her from him. He thinks he's a brilliant photographer, and he can't understand why anyone would be angry that he cheated. And he thinks he's so in the right, he asks God to murder people. Now, this isn't the Eddie Brock I know and love, being a pretty big Venom fan, but I do find it amusing. He's kind of a joke in this movie, but considering Venom is practically a footnote, I'm not sure how Brock could possibly be a more deeply motivated and more three-dimensional character without this being another hour long. And then he dies. I assume he dies because he refuses to take responsibility for his actions and because he won't forgive Peter. But after what happens to Harry, I can't be sure it's not just so Venom can't be in another movie. Number 4, Peter Parker. Peter gets the black suit and it takes away his inhibitions. Uncle Ben's real killer conveniently shows up so he's got someone to try to kill. He has a fight with Sandman and thinks he's killed him. After Harry gets Mary Jane to break up with him, he fights Harry and uses a pumpkin bomb to try to kill him. He walks away with great satisfaction, believing he has. Both of these characters manage to survive despite Peter believing he's killed them. He even tells Aunt May about Spider-Man killing Sandman, thinking she'll be happy, but of course she's not. She says, "I don't think it's for us to decide who should live and who should die." But then the film takes a no-harm, no-foul approach. He forgives Harry and Sandman at the end and has lines of narration over Harry's funeral about choice. He says, "It's the choices that make us who we are. We can always choose to do what's right." But it seems to me that he made the right choice too late, after he already thought he murdered 2 people. And just because his name's in the title, they don't die, and he gets the chance to redeem himself. Meanwhile, Sandman, who did kill people, gets to go off a free man, and Harry, who didn't hurt anyone by the end, has to die. Again, I like the idea of exploring Peter's dark side with the black suit, and he could get close to killing someone. But what does it say about his character if he thinks he's killed someone and then he does it again? And what's worse, he doesn't feel nearly enough remorse about it. What finally leads him to get rid of the black suit isn't that he thinks he's killed people, it's that he hit Mary Jane. His priorities seem kind of out of whack to me. He gets lucky, suffers no consequences, and we're supposed to applaud him for making the right choices. My point in all of this is that I appreciate the parallels and differences the movie tries to make with its characters, but it fails as a character study due to a convoluted plot and lazy characterizations. I don't think this was done to Peter purposefully. I think his motivations and choices were lost in the shuffle. Spider-Man 3 is vastly inferior to the last movie, sure, but it is wonderfully entertaining. The production values are great, and has some of my favorite action scenes in the trilogy. I love the score, especially the haunting black costume theme that creeps into the main title's music at the beginning and appears throughout when Peter's wearing the costume. The best idea in the movie is the anti-origin story. Spider-Man ends up on a new, darker path that parallels his original superhero origin. He's overcome with power, and this is great because earlier in the film, he's overcome with fame. Instead of starting out as a loser, he starts as a celebrity. What is an overwhelmed celebrity with superpowers like? He makes a mistake originally and learns about power and responsibility. Now he learns about power and revenge. The only thing I don't like, again, is that it goes too far and Peter really kills people, just getting lucky that they aren't actually dead. I like that Peter gets to do more science stuff here, though it's pretty subtle. He gets more screen time with Doc Connors, who's used to good effect by being the person who studies the symbiote and tells us what it is. One of Peter's few good, tender moments with Mary Jane is toward the beginning, when he tries to explain why the applause wasn't very loud at her show and starts getting deep into how acoustics work. Aunt May is, once again, really strong here, but she doesn't get the prominence she had in 2. Both of her scenes feel necessary and continue to provide Peter with his voice of reason. She tells a touching story about how Ben proposed to her, and she tells him a husband has to put his wife before himself. This is a smaller theme I won't get into now, but it doesn't work as well as it could for me because I personally think Peter is with the wrong girl, and I don't understand what he sees in her. Venom looks awesome. Yes, I hate how he's killed at the end and how he's tacked on, but I love how he moves. I love what he looks like when he gets disconnected from Brock, and I just wish the Venom face got more face time. Brock keeps pulling the face back to reveal his own, and it's silly. I wish the symbiote was made more of a character itself. Why does it bond to Peter? Why does it bond to Brock? Does it hate Peter for abandoning it like it does in the comics? Brock doesn't say we like he does in other incarnations, and it's hard to tell if the symbiote has its own intelligence. And why does Brock kill himself at the end? He jumps in after the symbiote and the explosion like he can't live without it, but this isn't explored, so it comes out of nowhere. It's also strange that he never calls himself Venom, but better that than some hokey explanation for the name. The problem with the black suit is that it overemphasizes Peter's self-doubt. It makes him more confident, but in a laughable way. He's that nerd who can never be cool even if the coolest person alive gave him free lessons. Everyone complains about the emo scene, where he's walking down the street strutting his stuff. I don't want to laugh at Peter wearing the black costume. It should scare us while it's scaring him. I like how he acts when he's outing Brock. There he's more calculating, ambitious, with raw arrogance. It's also funny that he tells Brock to get religion, considering Brock ends up asking God to kill him later. But otherwise, I don't know why Peter in the black suit is played up for laughs. There are a lot of contrivances and conveniences just to make the plot work. And I think these are why the movie gets so much grief for having too many plot threads and characters. Stories can fall apart when major elements are there only to make other elements work. For example, Harry's amnesia is played up as a big plot point. There are times when it even seems like he might be faking it, which would have been a cool twist, and I wish it had gone there. Later, when he gets his memories back and becomes a bigger part of the story, we find that that only happened to take him out of the picture for a while. So many other things need to be set up, but if Harry has his memories, there's nothing to stop him from constantly coming after Peter. So he has one big fight with Peter at the beginning, and gets amnesia so we can set up the parade, Mary Jane and Peter's relationship issues, Sandman's origin, and Eddie Brock and Gwen Stacy. Otherwise, it's pointless for character building and feels way too soap opera. Gwen is nothing more than a plot contrivance to give Peter a way to get back at Mary Jane for breaking up with him. The black suit just happens to land a few feet away from Peter and Mary Jane, and literally, it could have bonded to anyone. I think that's the laziest thing in the movie. And Venom and Sandman's cliched team-up is as simple as, oh hey, you there! You look evil and angry. Are you mad at Spider-Man? Hey, me too! Let's team up! Plus, for the third time in a row, the main conflict in the final act revolves around Mary Jane getting kidnapped. Now, I know this is a long review, and it all adds up to this. There's a great movie here, bogged down with too much extraneous stuff that prevents it from being a good, cohesive whole. Sandman, Venom, the retconned origin, and Gwen Stacy all feel superfluous, and they complicate a story that has all the trappings it needs to be as good as its predecessor. Had the black costume remained, but Venom was saved for another movie, if Harry were the main villain and stayed on the same path he was on at the end of 2, and if Peter was allowed to explore his dark side without returning to the origin, but emphasizing that idea of anti-origin, I think it would have been excellent. I'm going to give Spider-Man 3 a 2 out of 4.